I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, Peninsula Healthcare District, Sequoia Healthcare District, our first sponsor, Cognito, and Sequoia Hospital Dignity Health. We are so grateful to you and your wonderful partnership on this event. And again, I mentioned how thankful we are for today's presenters who are here today pro bono, generously giving their time to support the mission of the Parent Venture and the Parent Education Series. Again, we are just delighted. I want to tell you a little bit how today will work. If you don't mind, San, you could put up the pledge screen. This is a webinar format, so like always, we will have both a chat button and a Q&A button. The chat button will be for resource links and for you to talk to us or to talk to one another. My co-founder, Bev Hartman, will be operating the chat. And then later in the day, you will also be seeing later in the hour, you'll also be seeing resource links. If you have questions, we're going to have an extended Q&A period after short presentations by our presenters. So please do use the Q&A to put your questions in there. If you could keep them brief and kind of general so that we can get to as many of your questions as possible. Today, to make it simple, and for our inaugural fundraising event, we have partnered with Pledge, which is an app that Zoom is using this year to support nonprofit organizations like the Parent Venture. So we have today, and we hope that you will give and give generously, 3 different ways for you to donate. The first is by clicking on the Pledge fundraiser link that will be in the chat. So that is a link that you can go to that will take you directly to a donation page. You can also text to donate. So that is, you'll text PV to 707070. That will take you to the same Pledge page to offer your gifts of any amount, which we are very grateful for. Or there is also on your screen a QR code, which if you hold up your phone camera to, it'll take you directly to the link with that same donation page. All right, thank you, Seon, for that. So again, the format today is going to be each of our featured panelists, Madeline, Bill, and Donald, will be offering some top of mind comments about our theme, what gives you hope? And as you're thinking about that, and as we prepare for Madeline, our first speaker, we would love it if you would put a few comments in the chat about what gives you hope today. What gives you hope? I feel hopeful because you're all here with us and we have these wonderful presenters, and we are so grateful to all of you for joining us. We have almost 300 registered attendees today, so we know that this is going to be a very special presentation. So we would love some comments in the chat from you about what gives you hope. And now we have, one more thing. Today is going to be recorded, so this video will be available soon on our video library, which is a free resource, our YouTube channel. You will also see a link to the video library in the chat. Before we get started, we have something very special, a welcome from Superintendent Nancy McGee from the San Mateo County Office of Education. It's about 2 minutes. She recorded this for us this week because she's actually in a conference today, but we hope that you will enjoy the remarks from Superintendent Nancy McGee. Seon, can you roll the video?
Good afternoon, and welcome to all the parents who are joining us today, as well as those staff members who work closely with families to support our children and youth. There's actually never been a greater need for high-quality, relevant parent education than there is today. So I want to start by commending all of you for not only developing your own parenting skills, but helping ensure that training programs like those provided by Parent Venture remain available to all parents in our community. As you know, we're not naturally equipped with the skills and temperament needed to become successful parents. Parenting is hard, it's complicated, and it's a lifelong journey. Right when we think we have it figured out, our children change. Circumstances change. For instance, were you ready for parenting in a pandemic? And we need new ideas, strategies, and support to move forward. With its parent education series, Parent Venture has been there for our families year after year with inclusive, high-quality training programs and tools to help parents and caregivers become more effective and nurturing parents, especially during challenging times. While the pandemic has impacted all of us, its effect on our youth has been profound. Our schools report on student struggles as they adjust to in-person learning. The tension is palpable and mental health concerns are at an all-time high. Schools cannot tackle these challenges alone. Parents are critical partners. Thankfully, Parent Venture is there to help parents navigate these new waters, so they in turn can be there for their children. The title of today's session asks, what gives you hope? My simple answer is all of you. Thank you for doing all you can to be better parents, better community members, and better educators. Our parents need us now more than ever. Have a great session, and I hope to see you around.
I've seen that video several times and it still really gives me chills. We are humbled by Nancy's comments, and again, thankful to all of you. Well, let's get started. Let me tell you a little bit about today's first featured keynote, Madeline Levine. Dr. Madeline Levine is a psychologist with close to 40 years of experience as a clinical consultant, educator, and author. Her New York Times bestseller, The Price of Privilege, explores the reasons why teenagers from affluent families were experiencing epidemic rates of emotional problems. Her follow-up book, Teach Your Children Well, also a New York Times bestseller, tackles our current narrow definition of success, how it unnecessarily stresses academically talented kids and marginalizes many more whose talents and interests are less amenable to measurement. Her current prescient book, Ready or Not, focuses on how best to prepare our children and ourselves for an uncertain and rapidly changing world. Her books have been translated into multiple languages. Please join me in a really warm virtual welcome for my dear friend, Madeline Levine.
Thank you so much, Charlene. I appreciate your kind words. What gives me hope? I think you have to not be paying attention if you're not hopeful right now. We've got a vaccine. We've got kids back in school. I saw today they approved treatment. So we have treatment, vaccines, back in school. And by the way, yes, psych admissions were quite high. And we had, say, a doubling of eating disorders, but they're dropping now. And so I think that we've seen a real uptick. I think that's lessened at this point. And I want to make a statement, and maybe we'll talk about it later. I'm a psychologist for 40 years, which makes me sound very old, which I am. But kids are resilient under certain circumstances. And this pandemic has made many things clear, one of which is we have multiple different Americas. And some kids will be just fine, and many kids will be disadvantaged. And those are different groups. I find it hard to talk about kids because there are kids who really didn't lose much of anything, and there are kids who lost a great deal. And that's just an important point to make. For the kids who have done reasonably well, you know, there's this old study from World War II of Anna Freud and Dorothy Burlingame. And they looked at kids during the Blitz in England who stayed with their parents and those who were separated. And the assumption was that the kids who went to the countryside and were not in the bombing would do so much better. But in fact, what they found over a very extended period of time was the kids who stayed with their parents did much better, not a little better, did much better. And so the comment I hear all the time, which is, oh my God, I can't, you know, my kids are here all the time, is like, that's not such a bad thing, because if you're regulated, then your kids will be regulated. So this idea of co-regulation, I think, is super important. To the extent to which you're managing, the odds are that your kids will manage as well. You know, I used to be afraid of flying. And so you hit a bump, right? You look right at the flight attendant to see what she's doing. And she's always just going about her business. And I felt okay. So to the extent to which sessions like this help parents to regulate, it ensures much better regulation for their kids. And my comment on this is regulation is not so much about the lists of things that we were told in the beginning, right? Everybody had a list on their refrigerator of exercise this much and eat this kind of food and binge watch and blah, blah, blah. The problem with that, I think, and I used to say, your job is to get through this with your family reasonably intact. And I got a lot of pushback very early on that. It was like, come on, Dr. Levine, give us like tips. And now I think it's understood that having gotten through was an accomplishment. And all those lists about, fixing your closets and stuff were not that important. The other comment I want to make in terms of hopefulness, and this is a little odd, I'm hopeful because mental challenges, mental illness, symptoms of mental illness are being recognized in a way that they weren't before. So the fact that mental health is always part of the discussion through the pandemic, that wasn't the case before. I mean, Price of Privilege was written almost 20 years ago with expanding rates of anxiety disorders and eating disorders and depression. And the reason I wrote Ready or Not was it didn't get any better. It got worse. And part of that is around stigma. Part of that is the lack of accessibility of treatment. I'm not positive that what we're seeing is not at least partly delayed treatment. So the numbers look very scary, but also there were a lot of kids who didn't get treatment in the course of COVID. I think the fact that we're talking about it constantly now, the issue is, Fauci said the second pandemic will be a mental health pandemic. It has been a mental health pandemic for quite a few years. And I'm thrilled that has become part of the discussion minus stigma. So I know my 5 minutes are up. That's, and the other thing I'm grateful about is my granddaughter. I have a new granddaughter and a new grandson, man. And if that doesn't make you hopeful, I don't know what would.
Thank you so much, Madeline. That was beautiful. Congratulations. I'm in the grandparent queue, so I'll be watching your every move. Carrie Dubois. Carrie, can you join me on screen? We're now going to hear a couple of words from Carrie Dubois, who is Vice President of the Sequoia Union High School District Board of Trustees and a board member at the Parent Venture. Carrie.
Thank you, Charlene. It is so exciting to be at this event. I feel very honored to be able to say a few words to express my gratitude for the work of Parent Venture. I first became interested in parent education when I was pregnant with my first son. I read books like What to Expect When You're Expecting and many others. When my children went to nursery school, we were fortunate to be at a place where parent education was an ongoing part of the program. We had to attend the lectures. My passion and interest in parent education continued to rise as my children grew, and I needed it more and more. When I arrived at the elementary school district, there really wasn't a strong parent education program, so I began to advocate for one. When I arrived at the high school district, there was also not a strong parent education program. That's when I was introduced to Charlene Margot and her work through the Parent Education Series. After a while, I realized I didn't have to advocate so hard any longer because Charlene Margot was doing that for the district. She wanted to make sure high quality parent education was accessible throughout our district and throughout our region. I'm happy to be here today to donate money to this very worthy cause, and I hope you will join me in doing the same so that all parents can have access to this high quality program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. We are honored by you and honored to have you as a board member. All right, Donald Grant. Let me tell you a little bit about our next featured mini presentation. Dr. Donald Grant is a trusted thought partner to teams and organizations across the globe. He is the executive director of Mindful Training Solutions, a boutique training and consulting firm, and the former founding executive of the Center for Community and Social Impact at Pacific Oaks College. He holds a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, a bachelor's degree in biology, and a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner's certificate. Dr. Grant is also a workshop facilitator internationally, a film and TV consultant, and the published author of A Moon for Us All, a family narrative for young readers and their families, and Black Men, Intergenerational Trauma and Behavioral Health, a Noose Across Nations, published in 2019. Donald, please join us.
Thank you, Charlene. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today. So much of what Madeline shared resonated with me, and thank you for sharing those thoughts. I am not in the grandpa queue. My son is only 12 years old, but I am in the mix of multiple cross-country grandmas, which creates a whole new set of frameworks. So I'm happy to be here with you all today. There's so much that gives me hope. And when I think about the work that I've done across time and the research that I've done, I think about a new narrative that we're able to have right now, conversations that we haven't been able to have before, conversations that haven't been welcomed before. As the father of a son, a Black son, who is oftentimes in spaces that are primarily white, as a Black man who oftentimes finds himself in spaces that are primarily white, it's valuable right now and hopeful that we're talking about dismantling systems of oppression in a way that we haven't before. Historically, we haven't really seen much accountability for explicit things of sexism and racism and classism. And today, we're open to having that dialogue. We're open to thinking about how we frame, for instance, Christopher Columbus. We're open to thinking about how we talk about gender-based privilege. We're open to talking about how we look at the transgender community. And I think that presents my next layer of hope, is that young people are so brave. I look at some of the choices they make and some of the ways in which they move around the world, and there's a level of bravery that my generation didn't necessarily have to disrupt systems. And not only are they doing it in a brave way, they're doing it in a very deliberate way, a very special way. And so I think that parents today get the opportunity to see a generation of young people who are not willing to just accept the frameworks that we give them. The dinner table conversations are so much more fluid. Where many of us were children at a table who were to be seen and not heard, our children are now being able to share their thoughts and ideas and respectfully ask their parents questions and comment on the ways that we were raised and thoughts that we had to even make us be better critical thinkers. So that's what I'm hopeful about.
Thank you so much,
I
Don.
oftentimes exceed my 5 minutes, so I don't know if I went. I say I oftentimes exceed whatever time ramifications I have, so I don't know if I went beyond or not.
I think that you actually have another minute or two if you need it. Well, no, actually, let's keep moving, Donna. We'll save more time for Q&A. Thank you. That was beautiful. Becky Beacom, can you join us?
It's my pleasure.
We're now going to hear a few words from Becky Beacom, the former health education manager at Palo Alto Medical Foundation Sutter Health. Becky.
Well, a couple ways I could start, since everybody's talking about hope, and you know how important that is to me, Charlene. I just wanted to say about Parent Venture that hope is the spirit that Parent Venture brings to its work. Helping parents with high quality education and support for parents along this loving, challenging, wonder-filled, hysterical, sometimes scary, bumpy, but always fulfilling ride, or perhaps I should rename it Parent Adventure. And I want to take a moment to respond to one of the something that came up in the chat about what gave a parent hope, which was having candid conversations and discussions around difficult things, some of which Donald just mentioned. I wanted to share what I learned from an expectant parent in class years ago. When when he said his friend told him that parenting was as bad as it looks and better than you could ever imagine. And that's always stuck with me, because that is the space where we can have difficult conversations and still have faith in family and our children. And Parent Venture meets parents in that reality-based space, sharing expertise, compassion, and faith in parents, even while talking about those difficult discussions, and also offering skills to families, which I think is critical. I also want to say how much I appreciate that Parent Venture keeps your finger on the pulse of what parents care about the most, that you've shown that you can respond quickly to emerging issues. COVID is a huge example, as are some of the conversations that you've engaged parents around social injustice and racism. Timely, and you've unlocked new ways to deliver this to parents. Instead of bringing them to auditoriums, you mobilized quickly and expanded this beyond what anybody could imagine. So I just want to say thank you, and your quality has been on display for years, as Bev has said, and it's easy to take it for granted. And so today is an opportunity to say that we need you to keep going. We need the experts that you bring, the compassion that you and Bev bring and your whole team. And the way we do that is by supporting it. We have healthcare here today. We have schools here today. That shows the strong partnerships you have with families. And you have it in me as well. And I hope everyone on the call will join me in supporting with a generous donation to Parent Venture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky, for those beautiful remarks. We are honored to have you on our advisory council. Becky Beacom literally knows everyone in Silicon Valley, so we're very lucky to have her. All right, and now running the final leg of the relay is our friend, Dr. Bill Stixrud. We think we also have his partner, Ned Johnson, on the line. Hi, Ned. So let me tell you a little bit about Bill Stixrud. William Stixrud, PhD, is a clinical neuropsychologist and founder of the Stixford Group, as well as a faculty member at Children's National Medical Center and an assistant professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the George Washington University School of Medicine. He is also on the board of the David Lynch Foundation. Dr. Stixrud's work has been identified, featured in national media outlets, including NPR, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Scientific American. Bill is also a longtime practitioner of Transcendental Meditation and plays in the rock and roll band Close Enough. He is the author, with Ned Johnson, his friend and writing colleague, of the national best-selling book, The Self-Driven Child, and of their new book, What Do You Say? Talking with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress, Tolerance, and a Happy Home. Bill. Bill, I think you're on mute.
What I was saying, it's so fun for me to be here. I love Charlene and Bev and the work you folks do. Madeline's been one of my heroes for almost 20 years, and Donald's a new hero. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm also this grandparent club here. My oldest granddaughter, when I was 65, said, "Grandpa, how old are you?" And I said, 65. And she said, "Starting from one?" And I want to make 3 points, and I will hint at the stuff that makes me hopeful, but I'm going to talk about a couple things I think are useful for parents to keep perspective, and so we can be hopeful and optimistic. The first point is this: that parenting has never been easy. I mean, almost 40 years ago, I tested a kid whose mother was a humorist, and she said, we shouldn't call it raising children. We should call it lowering parents, because it's hard and it's humbling and it's humiliating. And fortunately, we don't need perfect parents. And I mean, we can screw up a lot. And as long as we apologize when we screw up, we know that we did the wrong thing, we apologize to our kids. It's one of the greatest ways to express respect for our kids. And they simply just need good enough parents. The second point is that one of the things that Ned and I kind of argue is that it's right for us as parents and grandparents to move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence in our families. In other words, someone who's not highly anxious and emotionally reactive, because it's just, we're much more able to soothe an infant if we stay calm, to help an angry third grader or an upset 15-year-old, if we can stay calm and we don't flip out ourselves. And so we know that calm is contagious. And my major motivation for working with Ned and the Self-Driven Child was to help parents feel that it's safe not to worry about their kids all the time. And one of the most useful tools in my 40 years of doing this work, that for being able to move in that direction to being a non-anxious presence, is taking a long view. And I realized early on that all of our anxiety, all of our fear and our worry for our kids, it's about the future. It's about if they're having a hard time, it's about they're going to get stuck and not get better or just get worse. And I realized, because if I had a crystal ball, I could say, your kid, by the time he's 25 or 30, he's going to be golden. You wouldn't worry. When I tell people, I've seen 5,000 kids like this and they turn out okay, they don't worry as much, because all our worry is they're going to get stuck in some negative place. And my experience is, if we don't get stuck, they're unlikely to get stuck themselves. And when we take that perspective, kids go through a hard time. It's easier to see that as part of their path. This is something that they're going through. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. And to see that they'll get out of it. And I got a Christmas card this year from a family, and it's on the front of it said, "You were right." And I opened it up, and it's a picture of these three siblings and their spouses. And they said they all turned out great. And all these kids were hot messes during childhood or adolescence. One of them flunked out of college twice. And they're all doing really well. And I think that that this perspective, this long-term perspective, is really helpful. And when we think about the fact that going through something that's hard, it's not only okay, it's necessary. It's necessary to train the brain to develop what Ned and I call high stress tolerance. So that resilience that only comes from being able to master stressful situations. And Tina Payne Bryson says that the formula for becoming resilient is adversity plus support. When kids have adequate support, it's okay for them to go through hard times. I mean, Ned says this a lot when we lecture, so I feel okay saying it. Ned was in a psychiatric hospital for 3 months in 7th grade. And he's one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met. One of the optimistic, positive, upbeat, amazing person. And the other point about this is that there's just so many influences on kids' lives that we don't anticipate. When I used to do therapy, I used to do a lot of therapy, and I'd be sitting with a family and they'd have a problem. I didn't know how to solve it. I didn't have an idea. They'd come back 2 weeks later and I'd ask about it. And something happened unexpectedly that solved the problem. So in any case, we take this long view. And the third point is this, that it's so great that we can be much more optimistic, we can be much more effective, much more positive, if we give up doing the things that don't work, that have never worked, including trying to force kids and trying to change kids against their will. And Ned and I talk about this idea of parents, as their kids get older, thinking about themselves more as consultants to their kids than as their kid's manager or the boss, with the idea being, ultimately, our goal is not to make sure a kid does well at every single step, but to help the kid figure out who he or she wants to be, what kind of life they want, and then how to help support them in creating the life that they want. And from our angle, a successful life is a life you're happy with. And that's what we want for our kids. And we think that playing this consultant role, it's much less stressful. And where we offer help, we offer our advice, we encourage kids to make their own decisions, and we support kids in solving their own problems so they can develop that kind of brain that when something stressful happens, they go into coping mode as opposed to freaking out or avoiding. And the last point is that we simply just have so much power as parents by changing our own steps. In our new book, Ned and I talk about the science of change, and we talk about something called motivational interviewing and this new SPACE program, this supportive parenting of anxious childhood emotions that come out of Yale, that treats childhood anxiety as effectively as therapy for the kids just by working with parents. We have so much power and to influence our kids in positive ways, help them figure out who they want to be by changing our own steps. And most of our work, I've always felt my whole career, that most of our work, when our kids are not doing well, it's on ourselves. And I think that that makes me optimistic, because there's all kinds of tools that we can use to develop optimism and positive emotion and meaning and active engagement in this world.
Thank you so much, Bill. As always, you hit the nail on the head and inspire us. So Madeline and Bill and Donald, are you ready for a few questions? Audience, this is your chance. You've been listening to everything. If you have some questions for our featured presenters, please do type them into the Q&A button. We have some questions that have been coming in and a few that we received beforehand. So let's get started. Here's one that is really on the top of every parent's or caregiver's mind right now. The parent asks, my kids are glad to be back at school, but they say that kids and teachers alike seem stressed and overwhelmed. What will it take to get things back to normal? Anybody? Madeline, you might be on mute.
I'm not sure that we're ever going back to normal, or that we should want to go back to normal. You know, challenge success. We've been trying to change schools, the project down at Stanford that I helped to co-found. We've been trying to change schools for almost 20 years. So I don't want to see it go back to the way it was. And I love one of the things Bill said. I just have to refer back to it, that parents tend to see their children as snapshots. Like right now it's hard, right? And oh my God, I'm really nervous about that. And I think it's much better to think about parenting as a movie. Like it's not any one point along the line that is critical. My kids are grown and they have children of their own now. It's the long view of things that I think really matters. And so, yeah, it's going to be hard now. Of course, it's going to be hard now. I don't, Tina's phrase, I don't think we interview for, what did she say? Interview for problems, basically. Your kid comes home, you know, don't start with, how was it? You know, was it really bad today? Did everybody with, you know, start with, how was your day? Or tell me something exciting that's happening this week. I think it's normal and expectable for there to be difficulty now. And we sit with it in whatever calm we can muster, and help our kids process it and really try and stay away from catastrophizing.
I think in addition to that, I'm sorry, Charlene.
No, go ahead, Donald.
I was just saying, in addition to what Dr. Levine just said, I think we sometimes minimize the efficacy of cognitive flexibility, having people be in situations that allow them to grow. You know, early on, we thought that the brain became non-malleable at a certain point, but what we know now is that both parents, children, and all sorts of people across the lifespan have the ability to create new pathways. It may take a longer time, it may take a different framework, but we can build some cognitive flexibility to do different things. I used to oversee a small portion of foster care systems for LA County Department of Mental Health. And one thing that I would help the young people who are in care understand is that a part of the work is not looking for normal, because it may never go back to what you consider normal. And your ability to tolerate the anxiety associated with the space in which you sit is going to be critical for your future's life journey. So we really want to help kids and parents learn to tolerate the anxiety, give them tools to be able to manage it. You know, when I did substance abuse work, one of the major components associated with relapse was the inability to tolerate the anxiety associated with the urge to do drugs again. Mm-hmm. And absent the tools to tolerate that anxiety, you see relapse. Now, we understand relapse is a part of recovery, but when we can get tools to mitigate it, we should. And so we want to make sure kids understand that there may not be ever a time where we go back to where we were, but how do you sit in and gain tools to understand, tolerate, and appreciate the space we are currently in?
So here's a related question I want to get your take on. Parent asks, my concern is we are increasing our distress tolerance, and things that are not normal or ideal are being normalized. e.g. climate change, school shootings. I don't want my kids to see this as normal and tolerate tragedies like that either. Any thoughts?
What one thing that I think about a lot is that the biblical prophets felt that things were so bad that the end of the world must be right around the corner here, because how could things possibly be worse? And I think that the human beings have always had that perspective to look that way. And I think that the challenge for me is simply that, or the inspiring thing for me is simply that we can't predict the future. And as Donald was saying, that young people have so much tremendous power. And what the adolescent brain and young adult brain is the creativity is so incredible. They have so much potential to see things in a different ways and to solve problems in different ways that we never would have occurred to us. And so for me, that perspective helps me stay sane, that I can't predict the future. Things may look like very bleak. There's all these problems, but people have always perceived it like that. People of my generation felt, how could you possibly bring kids into this world? A lot of my peers felt that way. And I'm so glad I didn't feel that way.
So Madeline, this question is directed to you. You've talked in your books before about the 30-year plan. I mean, you and I now have kids who are over 30. How do you think COVID has changed the way we should shape our kids' future?
So I feel really strongly in line with a lot of what's been said, that one of the mistakes that we make as parents is our need to protect our kids from challenge or adversity or whatever you want to call it. So in Ready or Not, I have a whole chapter on what I call accumulated disability. And we've all referred to it. So I just want to give one example of why I think it's problematic. Your 8-year-old daughter walks past a dog and the dog barks, and she comes home and she's teary and afraid to walk past the dog. And you have a couple of options. You can tell her she doesn't have to walk by the dog again, you're going to walk a different way. You can tell her to man up, I don't know what, and just get over it and walk by the dog. Or you can acknowledge her anxiety. She's 8, maybe walk next to her a couple of times, but your expectation is that your kid is not so fragile that they can't learn to tolerate the anxiety that comes with a little bit of challenge. And this will sound funny, but it's true. When I was on the road practically every week, I used to call my kids after I spoke and tell them something that went wrong, because something always went wrong. The mic didn't work, the slides weren't up, I tripped on my way up, whatever. And it wasn't like I dwelled on that. And I told them what went well, but it was like, this is just part of life. You will be confronted in life with challenge. And I think when you give the message over and over that your kid can't handle it, which is really that you can't handle it, right? Because we're anxious, we're up here anxious to start with because it's an anxious time, and then we can't tolerate anymore. So seeing our kids being anxious is tough for us. I think we have to learn to sit with that. You put your hand on your heart, take a couple of deep breaths, and just a short personal thing. Right before this started, my computer didn't work, my phone didn't work. There's work being done in my garage, and they were knocking on the door and packages were coming, and my loan was denied for incorrectly. It was just 100 different things coming in at once. And my husband, who's a surgeon, so he's good at this, came in and said, okay, we're going to box breathe now, Madeline. And he had me just, 90 seconds to breathe. And we need to learn that. Our narrative cannot be, this was the worst thing that ever happened and we're all in terrible shape. We need to think about what our narrative is going to be when this is over. And I would suggest that including upping your tolerance for your kids' anxiety is critical, because if you don't do it, then those are the kids who come back, Bill, I'm sure you've seen this. They come back from college, they can't make it. they can't eat the food in the cafeteria. They can't stand their roommate. There's a mouse, just stuff that's normal challenges of every day. And that starts when kids are young. And last thing, and then I'll be quiet, we tolerate young children much better, I think, than teenagers. So I'm watching kids learning to walk, right? They fall down, they get up, they fall down, and nobody's anxious. We're like, yeah, go, do it again. But with a teenager, it's like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. And the tolerance we have for young kids, because it seems so much less threatening, is something we need to develop for older kids. And I don't want to be misunderstood as saying whatever your kid does is fine. Parents usually know when their kids are in trouble. But whether it's sleeping at somebody's house or going to camp, the kinds of normal anxieties, we need to do a better job of being supportive and there and not upset.
So well said, Madeline. I knew 30 years ago, I watched a parent and I thought, we have lost our minds. She was following her toddler saying, good job walking. And I thought, that's it. Gotta do something. So this question is for Donald. Donald, parent writes, with the recent focus on social justice, I was hoping that students would return to school with more open minds. Instead, we're seeing lots of hate speech and racial bias. What can we do about it as parents and educators?
I love that question. We have to really start being honest about the kind of transitions that we're seeing in the dialogue and the literature. And we have to help people understand that there may be a little bit of grace that we need to provide with people whose historical narrative is being dismantled in a way that it hasn't been before. I believe that the research that I'm currently doing is looking really at this exact perspective. We oftentimes talk about the intergenerational trauma associated with those who are existing in the oppressed roles. Like we first learned about intergenerational trauma when we began to see the descendants of Holocaust survivors demonstrate traumas from a Holocaust that they didn't experience, and then Indigenous people, and then Black and Brown people from different communities. But we never talk about the little white girl, the little 11-year-old white girl who was taken to a lynching ceremony by her dad. We don't talk about the trauma that she experienced in an effort to maintain a system of white superiority. So I think that we have to work harder at being deliberate about the efforts that went in to create the narrative under which we currently exist, because that speaks to the massive work that has to be done to dismantle it. I'm reading this book right now. I forget the author's name, but you'll be able to find it easily. It's called Robert E. Lee and Me. And it's a book about a former West Point professor who was raised in the tradition and the narrative of Robert E. Lee being a hero. And it really is this white man's journey of unlearning the ideologies of superiority that he had been inundated with. And so I really think, to that point, we have to be honest. I mean, we hear all this talk about critical race theory. I was a K-12 educator prior to being a psychologist. And no K-12 educators are trained in critical race theory. And so we have parents who are unwilling to allow their children to experience a little bit of self-identity questioning as we talk about the honest history of our country. And so I think that's where it starts, is us being honest that this is not going to injure your child. In fact, it's going to enrich all of our experiences as we begin to decolonize curriculum. There was a book that I had to take out of a classroom years ago, that I worked with a group to take out of a classroom, an elementary school classroom. You all may be familiar with the Who I Am series. And this was a Who I Am series about Harriet Tubman. And there was one line in the book that said, Harriet Tubman had a good life until she was 14. Now, coming from an own voice perspective, no Black person would write that anybody who was enslaved had a good life at any point. Certainly, she may have had a birthday party. Certainly, she may have had a laugh or two. But if you're creating a narrative that says that an enslaved person had a good life until 14, what you're attempting to do is tell a story that slavery didn't impact small children, to create this narrative that's not really accurate, that it was brutal and terrorizing for children too. And so again, I think the goal is to combat the open-mindedness with a little bit of, the closed-mindedness with a little bit of grace, for those individuals currently unpacking this. Now, I'm not saying make excuses. I'm not saying don't hold accountable, but understand the magnitude of work that went into this ideology to really pay attention to the work that needs to go into dismantling it.
Thank you. You've given us a lot to think about in that response, Donald. This one is for you, Bill, and Ned, if you were here. Parent asks, I know that Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson suggest being a non-anxious presence. That sounds like a good idea, but how can you actually do
I tested a kid years ago who had 6 years old, had dyslexia. And so a tutor comes twice a week, including Saturday morning, to work with them. And one Saturday morning, he wakes up and mom wakes him up and says, the tutor is coming in just a couple of minutes. He says, I don't want to do it. He starts kind of resisting. And she sits down and says, honey, this is so important. And she starts telling him why it's so important that he does this. And she starts crying. And the kid says, Mom, you're going to have to get yourself together before we start having these talks. And so this non-anxious presence idea, it's simply that systems work best, whether it's a family, whether it's a corporation, organization, when the people in charge are not highly anxious and emotionally reactive. And the first way is we take care of our brains. And just simply losing an hour of sleep, your amygdala that senses and reacts to the threat is much more reactive. It's the best marker, the best neurological marker of resilience, of emotional resilience, is the strength of the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And losing sleep weakens those connections. So it's sleep, it's exercise, and from my perspective, it's meditation. And one of the things that makes me so hopeful is that in the mindfulness that Donald is working with, the Transcendental Meditation that I've been practicing for 47 years, there's huge interest in young people. There's all kinds of research that we really have tools for helping the nervous system function optimally and recover from trauma, recover from stress. And I don't know this kid with autism who, when he was 17, he learned transcendental meditation with his mom. And the mom was wealthy and knew a reporter and said, write a story. So the reporters asked the kid, what have you noticed from meditating? And he said, TM calms the mind and it calms the mom. And so it's also, as we said, it's your perspective. It's taking the long view, and it's talking back. It's learning to talk back to irrational, crazy thinking, including thinking about my kid needs to be doing this or this or this or that, or if my kid doesn't get into the right college, his life will be a wash. The kind of crazy stuff we tell ourselves, that fortune telling kind of error, like I can predict the future. We learn to talk back to that kind of crazy thinking. And ideally, one of the best things we can do is simply focusing on enjoying our kids. When we enjoy our kids spontaneously, they have the experience of being a joy-creating organism, as opposed to an anxiety or frustration creating organism. And just in terms of just that can help focus. That's the main thing. There may be nothing we can do for our kids than simply enjoy them as they are.
Well, I'm going to take this one last related question before we have a few remarks from the co-founders. I think this is a great question in light of what you just said, Bill. Rich asks, if we say this is life, get on with it, how do we then respond to the reaction of kids who say, if life is just going to get tougher, then where is the joy? Madeline, you have your hand up.
Okay, I'm good. During COVID, I have a little backyard out here, and during COVID, I had a stream of adolescents come with masks at 6 feet and whatever, and then just at 6 feet, depressed, anxious, substance, this general adolescent acting out, trouble kind of stuff. And I felt like I learned something critical. And that was in the beginning when I was doing my psychology thing of tell me more, and, does this remind you of anything? Not really very successful. And I shifted gears and I made up a list of organizations that needed help. And for every kid that came in, I said, you have got to get out of your head and go out there and do something for somebody besides yourself. And it was the most successful intervention I have had in 40 years of being a psychologist. Every one of those kids who went out and delivered food or called older people or tutored a kid who needed help, they did okay. So, and it resonates with me very strongly because, you know, I thought I was pretty good at the intervention, psychological intervention, but the sense of purpose that teenagers often don't have anyway, because we don't utilize them well. You harness that, you have faith in them. And I must say, I thought it was very successful.
It's
I
so
could
true,
add one
Madeline.
thing to that.
Go ahead, Donald.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Charlene.
Oh, I was just going to say, it reminds me of your friend, Bill Damon from Stanford, Madeline, how he says every kid may not have their passion identified, but everyone can find purpose, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, Donald, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No. I was just going to add to that wonderful response by saying that we also need to, pay attention to the difference between equity and equality. Sometimes we focus on equality. We're giving all kids all the same thing. I think Madeline just gave a great example of equity being giving kids what they need to thrive. And that's not all the same thing. It's different things. And we have to take time to discover what that is. Some kids will learn those tools inside adversity, but some kids have experienced so much adversity, they need adults like us to curate corrective emotional experiences so that they can then grow from adversity. And so even though we understand that adversity creates resilience, some of our young people have just been beaten down so bad that they need an opportunity to have those corrective emotional experiences. One kid I worked with in foster care, he would have a home disruption every 6 months. And so the last time I noticed this trend, and I told this caregiver, I said, listen, a brick is gonna come flying through your window in 6 months from now. I need you to maintain this placement. There's money to fix your window. At the 6-month mark, this young man always received intimacy from adults in an inappropriate way. So he would deliberately break the relationship in order to not receive that injury. When this caregiver kept him there after that 6 months and there were no inappropriate injuries, and she still loved on him and allowed him to stay there and the window got fixed, we gave him a corrective emotional experience to learn and live in a different way. And so in addition to all those things that we've been talking about, let us understand the difference between equity and equality and create systems that focus on equity and not equality.
All right, we have time for one more quick question before Bev and I have a few words to wrap up our hour together. I think this is a really, really good question. Parent asks, the pandemic shook my confidence in myself as a parent. I was overwhelmed by school at home, Zoom meetings for my kids. How can I rebuild my confidence as a parent or caregiver?
Practice. I mean, a lot, I'm looking at this, a lot of the questions are like, it's so hard, or I'm not sure. And, anything that we get good at takes practice. We know that about sports and all kinds of things. So, yeah, it's been an incredibly difficult time. We're finding new ways of dealing with challenge, and you have to not give yourself a hard time when you fall down, because you're going to have, it's like riding a bike, you got to fall down 100 times before you can get that bike around the block. And I think that the same thing is this. Think of it as a practice exercise.
I think that's great. And I think also, let your brain heal. Do the self-care that allows your brain to heal, and then things shift into perspective and your confidence comes back. Also, make a list of all the things you didn't screw up or the things you actually did well for your kid during the pandemic. I mean, it's a really such a powerful thing to simply write down, that I served him meals every night. We had family dinner, whatever you did. I helped him with his homework. Whatever.
Sourdough bread.
there you go. I mean, it's so much of kind of our mental health it's not the entire thing, but so much of it is what we choose to attend to, is in really making that practice to choose to attend to things that allow us to see ourselves in a positive light, that allows us to be optimistic, forgive ourselves for the stuff we screwed up. And I promise you that when you screw up, that you apologize to a kid. I don't know there's anything more that makes kids feel respected when we say, I'm sorry I screwed up.
All right. Thank you, Madeline and Bill and Donald, for all that wisdom. You can stay on screen with me, Sam. I think that we could probably put up the pledge slide, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about where we came from, okay? 16 years ago, I had a vision for what would become the Parent Education Series. As a young teacher at Stanford's Bing Nursery School, I learned that high quality parent education, like we do, matters, and that it can fundamentally change the lives of children. In 2006, when my own kids were in high school, I promised then Principal Matthew Zito that I would stay and that I would create a professional and long-lasting parent education program. At the time, I didn't know how it would work, but I knew three things for sure. First, as a community, we needed to address the rising tide of student stress. At the time, student suicide was on the rise, and we were desperate to figure out what was impacting the mental health of children and teens. A founding principle, mental health remains a core component of the work that we do today. Secondly, I saw a need for high quality parent education for public school parents. And that audience, many of you are online today, remains a critical element of our mission. Thirdly, I knew that I wanted to give parents a voice, a place where they could be seen and heard. And I wanted to put a larger umbrella over parent-led initiatives in schools and districts. And so it began. And I always tell this story standing in front of an audience at the Performing Arts Centers with 25 parents, mothers, fathers, caregivers in the library at Menlo Atherton High School with a $1,000 grant for the year from the PTA. Big shout out to PTA, PTSA, and school foundations that have helped support this program from the beginning. In our first year, we highlighted programs on sleep, drugs, and alcohol. We invited Dr. Denise Pope, Madeline Levine's co-founder at Challenge Success, senior lecturer at Stanford's Graduate School of Education, to give our first keynote address. I knew that our program, the Parent Education Series, would one day become an independent nonprofit organization, and we have. I knew that we would provide parent and community education based on the core elements of child and adolescent development. My partner, Bev Hartman, will tell you more about that. I knew that we could identify and curate the top national and international thought leaders in education, three of whom you've heard from today. I knew that our programs would be inclusive of race, gender, sexual orientation, and more. And I knew fundamentally that no matter how difficult the topic, we would approach it with joy. And so it is truly the embodiment of a dream, a vision that Bev and I are here with you today. Please help us grow the Parent Venture so that more families, kids, and schools can receive inclusive, high-quality parent and community education. As always, our programming is free for parents and open to the community. Today, we attract attendees from Silicon Valley and far beyond, 25 states in the US and countries around the globe, from Australia to Singapore, Egypt, Kenya, Ireland, and Vietnam. We hope that you will support us generously to help make our dream a reality. And what gives me hope, especially today, is you, the parents, caregivers, mental health, and education professionals who care about our kids. Thank you so much. And now a few words from my co-founder, Bev Hartman.
Thank you for joining us today. Whether you attend programs often or this is your first event, we hope you found it a worthwhile experience. I'm Bev Hartman, and I met Charlene early in my teaching career at Stanford. As a fellow educator, I was impressed with the Parent Education Series and so excited to partner with Charlene in the establishment of the nonprofit. Children and teens are at the heart of why we founded the nonprofit. Our aim is to empower parents and all of the adults who nurture and guide kids. We do this through education designed to better equip adults to engage in the process and think we can all benefit from more knowledge, skills, and strategies. During the pandemic, we pivoted to an online format and continued to offer simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. In our effort for outreach, though, we also hosted webinars and forums delivered directly in Spanish. These programs were very well received. we are learning that there is more that Parent Venture can do to ensure access to everyone to quality programming for our Spanish-speaking communities. These initiatives are what we hope to continue with the funds we're trying to earn today. What gives me hope is that the professionals that are dedicated to sharing their expertise are willing to step forward at this time. And most importantly, that the parents and community have turned out for these events. So really, the hope is in all of you that attend. I am inspired by the effort of parents and community members eager to learn and enhance their practices for guiding kids. If you are inspired too, please know that your gift will enable us to increase our ability to serve and to build an even more inclusive community, ultimately to benefit our children and teens. Thank you. Charlene?
Thank you so much, Bev. And Sam, if you would put up the pledge slide, we're going to say our thank yous and goodbye. A huge thank you to Dr. Madeline Levine, Dr. Donald Grant, and Bill Stixrud, Dr. Bill Stixrud, for your participation today. We were thrilled to have you and honored beyond belief. Thank you to all of you who joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay well, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.